There is a being that once was a god that was once a word that was never meant to be spoken. When it speaks, the world splits. When it is silent, the world is one. If you too were once a god, check out Pantheon, our brand inspired by myths, legends and folklore. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. The name came first. Abraxas. It appears across a scattered trail of ancient sources, scratched into stones, pressed into the faces of carved gems and written into the margins of magical papyri. To speak the name or to possess it was to access something powerful, something absolute. Abraxas was used. The name functioned more like a tool than a weapon, something to be invoked, inscribed, worn or buried. It appears on protective amulets, ritual objects, and fragments of magical formulae passed between mystics and sorcerers across the Hellenistic world. In these early appearances, the name itself is the presence, the active force, the ritual key. Its significance deepened through numerology. According to the Greek system of isopsephy, where each letter carried a numerical value, the letters in Abraxas add up to 365. The number of days in a solar year. This link suggested that the name represented a complete cycle, the sum total of reality encoded in language, a power that defined the entire turning of the world. This association made the name more than sacred. Abraxas became a kind of cosmic formula, a word treated as a self-contained force. In the melting pot of ancient Alexandria and beyond, it absorbed the fragments of older traditions, the astral frameworks of Babylon, the solar cults of Egypt, the dualistic tension of Persian thought. Rather than contradict one another, these influences converged within the name, which began to represent something far more complex than a deity. It became an axis, something around which beliefs could be built and broken. The visual representations came later. A rooster-headed figure with serpent legs and weapons in its hand would become common in later iconography. But that imagery was built on top of the name, not the other way around. The myth had to catch up with the word. To speak the name was to insert oneself into the machinery of the world. To inscribe it was to define the boundary between what was chaotic and what could be known. To wear it was to carry the structure of time and the illusion of control. But to understand it, fully and without distortion, meant dismantling the definitions of meaning that kept good and evil, light and darkness, safely apart. That was never the intention. The earliest known teachings to place Abraxas at the centre of creation came from Basilides of Alexandria, a 2nd century Gnostic teacher working in Roman Egypt. In a world saturated with competing gods and rising orthodoxies, Basilides taught a version of reality that was almost entirely inverted from the mainstream Christian message. For him, the God of the Bible was an ignorant force, far removed from the true origin of all things. The lesser creator was known as the demiurge, and he was blind to the existence of anything above him. He shaped the material world out of ignorance, and the world that followed was flawed, broken, and saturated with illusion. Above him, far above him, was Abraxas. Not a god in the human sense, but a primary source. The first power, the force from which all things emerged, including divine intelligence, speech, will, and light. Basilides taught that Abraxas was the origin of all other powers, of everything that held meaning, motion, and life. From Abraxas came a sequence of spiritual forces known as aeons, vast radiant emanations of power. These aeons gave rise to the archons, rulers that governed layers of invisible reality. Human existence was trapped beneath a towering ladder of spiritual barriers. Above the material world were 365 distinct realms, each ruled by a different archon, each further separating the soul from the original source. The name Abraxas was understood to contain this entire cosmic arrangement. Its numerological value matched the number of heavens. It was a cipher, a single world that held the entire shape of reality. To know the name was to gain a key to the totality of existence as it was believed to truly be. The physical world was the lowest rung of an unseen hierarchy, and the only way out was through awareness, through gnosis. Abraxas revealed, and what he revealed was a world ruled by lower powers, each convinced of its own importance, each standing in the way of what lay beyond. To invoke his name was to pierce the veil, to see that even the God of Scripture was only one small part of a much larger chain. To learn the name of Abraxas was to risk everything the Church tried to control: belief, obedience, and fear, and those who understood that no longer needed saving. Abraxas exists beyond the categories that define most gods. It's not shaped by morality, divided by dualism, or limited to light or darkness. In Gnostic belief, Abraxas is the source of all extremes: joy, pain, beauty, horror, creation, and collapse. These are functions of the same origin, and nothing is excluded. This stood in direct opposition to the teachings of early Christianity, where the universe is shaped by the struggle between a benevolent creator and the malevolent adversary. One offers salvation through obedience, the other corrupts and destroys. Everything depends on which side you serve. Abraxas generates both sides. For the Gnostics, it was a confrontation. If blessing and suffering emerge from the same source, then neither carries meaning on its own. A life of joy may offer no reward. A life of suffering may reveal nothing. With no divine preference, the world becomes exposed. Only the weight of what exists. This is what made Abraxas terrifying. It left punishment and justice indistinguishable. Without moral certainty, the entire idea of order begins to break down. What remains is power without explanation, permission without restraint. There were no altars to Abraxas, no commandments, rituals, oaths, only awareness. To understand this force was to recognize that every law, every comfort, every fear came from the same source, and none of it offered safety. The soul, once it sees this, moves outside the boundaries those systems enforce. The gods we worship and the demons we condemn are reduced to fragments, incomplete expressions of something far older. This is where morality ends and where the presence of Abraxas begins. On ancient carved gems, often worn as protective amulets, the name Abraxas appears alongside a figure that defies categorization: a rooster head, a human torso, legs formed by coiled serpents, one hand holding a whip, the other holding a shield. The image is functional. Each component encodes a specific force. Together they form a complete expression of power. The rooster head represents time and awakening. It marks the transition between night and day, carries solar meaning, and signals the return of light. In the iconography of Abraxas, the rooster marks the beginning of movement. It announces the cycle. The serpent legs tie Abraxas to the chthonic, the world beneath the surface. Serpents have long been linked with knowledge, danger, and regeneration. They represent the grounding in primal forces, wisdom that coils rather than ascends. Legs made of serpents are built for anchoring. Abraxas moves through instinct as much as intellect. In one hand, Abraxas holds a whip, the power to command, drive, exert force without negotiation, a tool of motion and domination. In the other, a shield, a symbol of containment and resistance. The whip extends control, the shield maintains it. Together they represent the ability to push and to endure, to dominate and to withstand, all in the service of order. This hybrid form reflects the influence of multiple creatures. The serpents and solar motifs recall Egyptian ritual. The use of animal-headed beings echo Persian iconography. The abstraction and magical intent align with Hellenic and mystery cults. They converge. The image of Abraxas operates across them. It is a glyph, a symbol designed to be used. Something that could be worn, invoked, or pressed into an object. The goal was control. The image of Abraxas functions like a circuit, each part carrying a charge, each element completing the pattern. When Carl Jung encountered Abraxas, he was confronting the total structure of the psyche. In the 7 Sermons to the Dead, a set of esoteric writings he claimed were dictated by inner voices during a period of psychological crisis, Jung placed Abraxas above both God and devil. A power that contained all opposites, without favour and without mercy. To Jung, Abraxas was the truth behind the mind's illusion of separation. It is psychic, the unconscious, the self. Abraxas appears at the threshold of what Jung called individuation, the process by which a person integrates all aspects of the psyche, especially those that have been buried, repressed, or split off. In that process, the figure of Abraxas becomes the archetype of wholeness. It destroys the moral boundaries that keep the ego intact. It erases categories. It forces the individual to confront the terrifying possibility that the soul generates its own gods and its own demons. Where Christianity taught salvation through obedience and Gnosticism taught liberation through knowledge, Jung warned of something else entirely: the transformation through annihilation. When the opposites within are no longer at war, they collapse into one unbearable truth: that everything you are, love, hate, or fear, is part of the same invisible field. Abraxas is what happens when the mind meets that field directly, a vision that burns away illusion and leaves only total awareness. Abraxas represents a contradiction as a single unified force. It gathers creation and destruction into the same movement. It draws good and evil from the same source. These qualities operate together, shaping reality as expressions of one underlying current. In the presence of Abraxas, familiar divisions lose their authority, meaning shifts, identity loosens its edges. The mind encounters reality without fixed reference points. For some, this experience produces fear. For others, it produces transformation. Both responses emerge from the same confrontation. Abraxas brings awareness to the surface. The self encounters its full range at once. Desire, violence, compassion, and insight appear as parts of a single psychological field. The separation that once allowed order dissolves, and consciousness adjusts to a wider frame of experience. This figure matters now because the modern world reflects the same condition. Belief fragments, identity multiplies, truth shifts shape depending on context. Abraxas expresses this state with clarity. It shows a reality shaped by tension rather than resolution. To engage with Abraxas is to accept complexity as a permanent condition, to remain present within contradiction, to carry awareness without retreat into certainty. This is the paradox Abraxas represents, and it remains active. To speak his name is to end the game. There's no God coming, no devil waiting, no heaven above. Only you, and the thing that watches back when you say, Abraxas.